This story is titled, I Thought Our Love Was Forever, but She Left Without Looking Back. Now I must learn to live without her and find myself again. Looking back, it's almost laughable how certain I was, how completely and utterly convinced that the life I was building was solid, unshakable. I had spent years believing in the kind of love that movies are made of, the kind where two people choose each other over and over again, no matter how many years pass or how much life throws their way. I thought that was what Emily and I had. I thought we were unbreakable. For 3 years, we built something that felt real, something that felt like it could last forever. She was my best friend, my partner in every sense of the word. We knew each other inside and out. The little things, the ones that don't seem to matter to anyone else but mean everything when you love someone. I knew that she hated the sound of alarms blaring in the morning, so she set her favorite song as her wake-up call instead. I knew that when she was anxious, she would twist the ends of her sweater sleeves between her fingers, a nervous little habit she never noticed herself doing. She knew me just as well, could read me with a single glance, could tell when I needed space and when I just needed to be held. That's why I never saw it coming. That's why I never even considered, not for a second, that the life we had been building together could unravel in the space of a single evening. It had been an ordinary night, one of those comfortable, easy ones where the weight of the world seemed to settle into the background, where nothing existed except the two of us in our little home, wrapped up in the future we were planning. Emily was curled up on the couch, her laptop balanced on her knees as she worked through our wedding guest list, the glow of the screen reflecting in her deep brown eyes. I was flipping through a travel brochure, absently tracing my fingers over the images of turquoise waters and golden beaches, picturing the honeymoon we had been dreaming of. Everything felt settled, peaceful. Then, in a single moment, that peace shattered. She closed her laptop with a quiet snap, a movement so small I almost didn't notice it at first. But something in the air shifted, something imperceptible yet undeniable. I glanced up, catching the way her fingers twisted at the ends of her sweater sleeves, that nervous habit, the one she only did when she was afraid to say something. I set the brochure down slowly, watching as she struggled to meet my gaze. A quiet sort of tension filled the room, stretching the space between us like a rubber band pulled too tight, moments away from snapping. And then, with a voice softer than I had ever heard it, she told me that she needed a break. It took me a second to process the words. A break? From what? From wedding planning? From the stress of the details, the endless decisions that came with preparing for a future together? But no, she hadn't meant a break from planning. She had meant a break from us. From me. The confusion must have been plain on my face because she kept talking, rushing to explain as if the right combination of words could make it easier to understand. She told me she felt overwhelmed, that everything had been moving too fast, that she needed space to clear her head before taking such a huge step. And then she said it, the thing that made my stomach drop, the thing that turned this moment from painful to something far worse. She had been talking to some old friends, she said. They were planning a trip to Europe, just for a few months. She thought she needed to go. And just like that, the floor beneath me seemed to shift, like the ground had tilted without warning, leaving me unsteady, grasping for something to hold on to. A few months. That's what she had said. She wanted to leave for a few months, right before our wedding, right before we were supposed to start the rest of our lives together. I sat there, absorbing her words, feeling them settle like a weight on my chest. I had been picturing the life we were about to start, the home we would build, the quiet Sunday mornings spent drinking coffee in bed, the years of laughter and love and growing old together. And she had been picturing leaving. She kept talking, kept trying to explain, but the words felt distant, muffled, like I was hearing them from underwater. Something about how this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, how she needed to do this to make sure she was ready, how she hoped I would understand. Understand? I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat, twisting into something that burned instead. Of course I didn't understand. People don't walk away from something they truly want. They don't step back from love just to make sure it's real. She reached for my hand then, as if she could soften the blow, as if she could take it all back with a touch. But I pulled away, shaking my head because I already knew. There was nothing left to say. This wasn't about stress. It wasn't about needing time to think. This was about something deeper, something unspoken. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been too blind to see. Emily had already been slipping away, piece by piece, for longer than I had noticed. And now she was gone. In the days that followed, everything felt unreal, as if I had stepped outside my own life and was watching it unfold from a distance, powerless to change the script that had already been written. The world around me remained unchanged. Cars still sped down the street outside our apartment. People still went about their lives. Voices still rose and fell in laughter and conversation. But to me, everything had taken on a muted quality, as though someone had turned down the saturation, leaving everything dull and lifeless. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, dissecting every word, every shift in her expression, every nervous flick of her fingers against the hem of her sweater, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when the foundation of our relationship had begun to crack. Had it been weeks ago? Months? Had she always been planning to leave, even as we picked out invitations and tasted wedding cakes and argued over seating charts? Had I been nothing more than a comfortable place for her to land until she found an escape that felt more thrilling, more new? The thought burned, a slow, simmering ache in the center of my chest, one that refused to fade no matter how many times I told myself that this wasn't about me, that people change, that love, even the strongest kind, sometimes isn't enough. But those were just things people said to make pain more bearable, weren't they? Lies wrapped up in pretty bows meant to soften the blow of a reality that cut too deep. Because the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth, was that she had chosen to leave. She had chosen to walk away, to trade a life with me for a temporary adventure, and no amount of self-reassurance could change the way that felt. She packed her bags 2 days later. She hadn't asked me to help, hadn't even tried to pretend that this was just a break and not the slow, agonizing end of something that was supposed to last forever. I had watched from the doorway, arms crossed over my chest, as she moved around the bedroom we had shared, methodically folding clothes and placing them into her suitcase with the kind of careful precision that suggested she had been preparing for this moment long before she ever found the courage to tell me. She had stopped only once, her hands hesitating over a small picture frame that sat on the dresser. A photo of us from the early days, her in my oversized hoodie, her head resting against my shoulder, both of us laughing at something neither of us could remember now. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might offer some last-minute reassurance, some final thread of explanation that could make sense of it all. But she didn't. Instead, she placed the frame face down and continued packing, as if the memory itself had already become too much to carry. I could have spoken then. I could have asked her if she loved me at all, if any of it had been real, if she would miss me when she was wandering cobblestone streets in a city where I no longer existed. I could have asked her why. But something in me refused to beg for answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. So instead, I stood there in silence, watching as she zipped up her suitcase and walked past me, leaving behind only the faintest trace of her perfume, a scent that had once meant home and now smelled like loss. I didn't watch her go. I couldn't. The door clicked shut behind her, and with it, something inside me splintered. In the weeks that followed, the emptiness she left behind settled into the spaces she had once filled, lingering in the untouched corners of our apartment, in the quiet absence of her voice, in the cold half of the bed where she used to sleep. I tried to move through it, to exist in a world that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too wrong. But grief, because that's what it was, wasn't it? A kind of mourning for something that had died without warning. Doesn't come in clean, predictable waves. It doesn't follow a set timeline or fade in neat, orderly stages. Instead, it comes in the small, unexpected moments. The sight of her favorite mug still sitting in the cabinet, the stray bobby pin left on the bathroom counter, the automatic instinct to reach for my phone and text her before remembering that she was no longer mine to reach out to. People told me I would heal. That time had a way of dulling even the sharpest pain, that eventually, the weight of her absence would become easier to bear. And maybe that was true. Maybe one day, I would wake up and find that the ache had settled into something softer, something manageable. But not yet. Because even though she was gone, even though the suitcase had disappeared from our closet and her name had faded from my phone screen, I still found myself waiting for the sound of her key in the lock, still half expecting to turn a corner and find her there, smiling like none of this had ever happened. And that was the cruelest part of all, how love had a way of lingering, of refusing to let go, even when the person it belonged to had already walked away. First update. There's a strange thing that happens when someone you love walks away, not in the way that distance or time naturally pulls people apart, but in the way that leaves everything feeling unfinished, like a story missing its final chapter, like a song that cuts off before the last note can play. You tell yourself that life goes on, that people leave and the world keeps spinning, that there are worse things than heartbreak. But deep down, you know that something has shifted, that the space they occupied hasn't simply vanished, but lingers like a phantom, pressing against the edges of your reality, making itself known in the quiet moments when you least expect it. In the weeks after Emily left, I became acutely aware of that emptiness, not just in the physical sense, the absence of her voice filling the apartment, the missing weight of her presence beside me in bed, but in the way that my entire existence felt off balance, as if I had spent years walking a path that suddenly disappeared beneath my feet. I moved through my days mechanically, performing the motions of a life that no longer felt like my own. I woke up, showered, went to work, came home, ate meals I barely tasted, stared at the television without registering a single thing playing on the screen. Time blurred together, each day bleeding into the next, an endless loop of monotony where nothing changed except the growing realization that I no longer knew what to do with myself now that she was gone. I told myself I wouldn't check her social media, that nothing good could come from seeing glimpses of the life she had chosen over the one we had built together. But willpower has a way of eroding in the late hours of the night, when exhaustion dulls your rational mind, when the ache in your chest makes you reach for something, anything that might dull its sting. So one evening, with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence of my apartment, I gave in. And there she was, smiling, standing on a street in Paris, the Eiffel Tower glowing behind her, the caption beneath the photo simple and infuriatingly carefree, the start of something beautiful. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting in a way that was almost laughable in its predictability. Of course she was happy. Of course she was standing in one of the most romantic cities in the world, looking effortlessly radiant, looking like someone who had never spent a single night lying awake, drowning in regret. While I had been piecing myself back together, she had been out there, wandering through foreign streets, sipping wine in candlelit cafes, embracing the adventure she had traded our life for. And the worst part, the part that made my throat tighten and my hands clench into fists, was the undeniable truth staring me in the face. She had never looked back. Not once, not even for a moment. I closed the app, tossed my phone onto the coffee table with a little more force than necessary, and exhaled sharply, trying to steady the storm brewing inside me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't care, that she had made her choice, and so had I. But lies, no matter how well constructed, have a way of unraveling under the weight of reality. And the reality was I did care. Because love doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't pack its bags and leave the same way she did. It lingers, burrowing itself into the crevices of your soul, refusing to be evicted just because the person who once nurtured it has moved on. It shows up in unexpected places. On a random Tuesday afternoon when you pass by a cafe where the two of you once sat for hours, wrapped in quiet conversation, in the scent of a familiar perfume drifting through the air, in a song playing softly in the background of a grocery store that makes you freeze in place, because it was once your song, the one she sang along to in the car, the one that made her reach for your hand without thinking. It's infuriating, really, the way memory works, the way it holds on to things you would rather forget, preserving them with crystal clarity, refusing to let them fade no matter how much you wish they would. For a while, I thought healing meant pretending I was fine. I thought it meant pushing forward, keeping my head down, drowning myself in work and routine and anything that might fill the void she left behind. But grief, because that's what this was, wasn't it? The mourning of something that had died without warning, doesn't adhere to logic. It doesn't follow rules. It sneaks up on you in the quiet moments, in the spaces where distraction fails, in the seconds between one breath and the next, whispering reminders of what once was, of what will never be again. And so slowly I stopped trying to outrun it. Instead, I let it in. I let myself feel the loss, let myself acknowledge the hurt, let myself sit in the wreckage of what had once been my future and understand that some things don't need to be fixed. Some things need to be grieved. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it felt unbearable, when the loneliness pressed down like an anchor, heavy and suffocating. But there were also moments, small, fleeting moments, where I caught glimpses of something else, something softer, something almost like relief. Because as much as it hurt, as much as I had convinced myself that her absence was an open wound that would never close, there was another truth waiting quietly beneath the pain, one I hadn't been ready to admit before. She had given me an answer I hadn't wanted but desperately needed. She had shown me who she was. And now finally, I was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, losing her wasn't the tragedy I had made it out to be. Maybe it was a gift. Second update. The thing about healing is that it doesn't happen the way you expect it to. It doesn't come in dramatic moments of realization or with some great epiphany that suddenly makes everything fall into place. It isn't neat or linear or even particularly kind. Instead, it is slow, unpredictable, and filled with setbacks, a process that unfolds in ways so subtle that you don't even notice it happening until one day you wake up and realize that the weight you have been carrying for so long feels just a little lighter than it did the day before. At first, I thought moving on meant actively doing something, rearranging furniture to erase traces of her presence, deleting old photos, forcing myself to go out and be social, anything that might speed up the process of forgetting. But what I came to understand was that moving on wasn't about forcing myself to forget her. It was about remembering in a way that no longer hurt, about allowing the memories to exist without letting them consume me. It wasn't about pretending she had never been a part of my life, but about accepting that she had been, and that she had left, and that life, somehow, still went on. There were days when the absence of her presence still felt like an echo in the quiet spaces of my life. Moments when I would instinctively reach for my phone to share some mundane thought before remembering that there was no one left to text. Nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she ever thought about me the way I sometimes still thought about her. But the difference was that slowly, those moments became less frequent. And when they did come, they no longer felt like an open wound, but rather like a scar, something that had once hurt but had since healed, something that was a part of me but no longer defined me. I don't know when exactly it happened, when the pain shifted into something softer, something easier to carry. Maybe it was the first time I went an entire day without thinking about her, or the first time I laughed, really laughed, without feeling like there was something missing. Maybe it was when I finally put away the last of the things she had left behind, not out of anger or resentment, but simply because I no longer felt the need to hold on to them. Maybe it was when I caught myself enjoying my own company again, realizing that solitude wasn't the same as loneliness, that being alone didn't have to mean being incomplete. And then one day, something changed. It wasn't a big moment, nothing particularly noteworthy or significant, just a quiet shift in the way I saw the world. I was sitting in a small cafe, sipping coffee while absent-mindedly flipping through a book, the kind of ordinary afternoon that had once felt impossible in the wake of her departure. The air was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of cups against saucers, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby table. It was a scene so normal, so utterly unremarkable, and yet as I sat there, I realized something. I felt okay. Not great, not overwhelmingly happy, just okay. And for the first time in what felt like forever, that was enough. Because the truth is, people leave. They change, they grow, they make choices that don't always include you. And sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, no matter how much you want to hold on, you have to learn to let them go. And maybe, just maybe, that isn't the tragedy we make it out to be. Maybe it's just a part of life, a necessary loss that makes space for something new. I used to think that love was something that could be lost, something that could be taken away, leaving only emptiness in its place. But now I see that love isn't something that disappears. It simply changes shape. The love I had for her, the life we had built together, it hadn't vanished. It had simply transformed into something else, something quieter, something more distant, but no less real. And so, as I sat there, watching the world move around me, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, the quiet certainty that life was still unfolding in ways I couldn't yet see, I allowed myself to believe that the best was still ahead of me. That love, the kind that lasts, the kind that doesn't leave, was still out there, waiting for me to be ready for it. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed that I would be.